So the last two meetups, this is only our third one so far. The last two, we looked at the ideas that you are of value and that you have something to contribute in this space, whatever space you're in at the moment. They're two really big key things that we value a lot at the Lift Project. You're of value and you have a significant contribution to make. So Darren's building a little bit more off that today with his next topic that he is going to be talking about. So Darren, I'm going to throw over to you now.
Hey, really nice to have you joining us. And as Mandy's already pointed out, we, over the first two Lift meetups, we introduced what I think are really foundational principles for achieving well-being. And the first one is that you are a person of value. So it really speaks to your identity and your worth. And the second one is that you have a contribution to make. And so in this presentation, I'd like to explore a key thing that often gets in the way of people making their authentic contribution. And it's going to be an embarrassing story for me, all right? So I hope that you appreciate and enjoy that. So anyway, I'm going to start off with the story of two quite remarkable young men. This is Henry and Robert McMahon. Now, these boys, the story, true story, occurred back in 1914. And these two young gentlemen lived in country Victoria, which is very close to where I grew up, in a place called Gippsland. And they wanted to attend the university here that I teach at, Avondale University. And so they had no money, but what they did have is a skill in building boats and rowing these boats. They're Victorian champions in rowing. So anyway, they decided what I'm going to do is we're going to build a boat and then we're going to row it all the way up the coastline to Sydney. Now, this is the journey that they're about to embark upon. And you can see there's Lake's Entrance down the bottom. They're going to paddle all the way up to Sydney. This is a journey of about 1,100 kilometres. So what's that, sort of nearly 700 miles for our US friends. And treacherous waters. Now, I actually grew up in that, as I said, that region. And my summer job was we were a lifeguard on the beaches down there. I can tell you it's a really rugged coastline and treacherous. This is Bass Strait, where huge swell. So the fact that they were even entertaining this idea was crazy. But they did more than just entertain the idea, they did it. On a particular morning, they paddled out through the lake's entrance heads into the open ocean. Their mum standing on the bank waving them. She cooked them some pies that they'd put in the bottom of the boat for their journey, and they headed off. Now, it turns out for the first 32 hours, they could not find anywhere to bring the boat in to have a rest, so they were on the oars for that period of time. And then when they finally found someone, they came in, flipped the boat upside down, slept under the boat, and then they went again. 11 days later, after a couple of near misses, and literally they nearly killed themselves on a couple of occasions, they paddled into Sydney Harbour. And what they didn't know is that word had got out about their remarkable feat. And the local newspapers and media channels had all got together. And as these boys paddled into Sydney Harbour, there were over 200 people waiting and applauding them in. And there was a lady there that actually said, I am so impressed with you and that boat of yours. I would like to purchase that boat, which she did. And the money actually funded their train trip, which was a short train, about an hour or 2 hours or so, up to Avondale University. And the funds also paid for all of their stay, their studies for the next year. So an amazing story. Now, 100 years later, flash forward, leading up to the centenary of this particular event in 1914, the university thought, they knew the story, and they thought, well, we need to commemorate this. What about if we were to reenact this remarkable paddle? And so they looked around and they said, hey, we've got an idea. They said there were the McMahon brothers, who from country Victoria, Gippsland, who did this paddle. And now we have the Morton brothers. So it turns out that there's myself and my brother Jason, who are both lecturers here at the university. And they said, look, you're from the same area and we both are into water sports. They said, would you like to reenact this? And we said, yes, let's do it. And they said, and what we'd like to do is not just do the basic journey. We would love for you to paddle all the way to Sydney, but then continue up into Lake Macquarie. There's an entrance at a place called Swansea Channel, and then paddle up the creek, Dora Creek, all the way to the banks of Avondale University to finish the journey. And we said, let's do it. This sounds like an epic adventure and a story to be told. And so anyway, my brother and I, Jace, we set out on this mission and started making the plans with the university and the marketing team. However, we ran into our first hurdle. And that was, we realised that the time of year that the McMahon brothers paddled was different to the time of year that we needed to do it for a variety of different reasons, fitting into our programs and the like. And then it turns out, see, my brother has a PhD in marine biology. He did the research and discovered that along the east coast of Australia, there is a really treacherously fast current that runs at the particular time of year that we were going to be doing our adventure. It's called the Great Eastern Australian Current. If you watched Nemo, you probably saw him in that little channel for a while, that little funnel. Anyway, it turns out when we started to look at this current runs really, really fast in the opposite direction to what we needed to go. So much so, it would have been impossible for us to row this boat against the current. So we had to modify our journey, all right? So the best laid plans, turns out we had to cut our journey short just a little bit and take off this section here. Yes, not great, not as great a story as it. We had to go, instead of doing the whole trip from Lakes Entrance to Sydney, we could only go from Sydney up the last little bit there. And so anyway, nonetheless, this is still a great concept because it's about us completing the journey. So to zone in, it was from Sydney. We're going to paddle up to Swansea Channel, across Lake Macquarie, up Dora Creek, and then arrive on the banks of the Dora. So we started to make plans. And so we did the work, and the McMahon family heard about this, and they said, we will even fund a replica of the boat that the boys used. So they did that. So we had our boat ready and we were making plans. And then what we found out, to take an open boat, rowboats, not enclosed, into open water, into the open ocean. In these days, you need insurance for that the university wasn't willing to fund because it was very, very expensive. So it turns out we had to actually cut off just a little section of this proposed trip, and we had to take this component here off it. That section there. So all of a sudden, our epic adventure paddling from Lakes Entrance was cut significantly shorter, and instead we were going to be, just to zoom in, we would have to start at the edge of the ocean, so we weren't in open water, paddle across Swansea Channel, or up Swansea Channel, across Lake Macquarie, it's a long stretch here, and then up Dora Creek, past this little place here called Shingle Splitters, up Dora Creek, all the way to the banks of Avondale University. So we were excited. The big day was set. The newspapers, local newspapers, were notified of this. And then the day was all go. We woke up that morning, and friends, I tell you, I have never seen wind like this. And the wind direction was this way, which meant that we had to paddle or row for around about 10 kilometres across open lake, where the waves would have been huge and the wind would have been ferocious. And it soon became apparent that it wasn't actually humanly possible, at least not for the two Morton brothers. So we had to cut back a little aspect of our journey. We had to cut off this section here. And so what we decided, that we would paddle from this place called Shingle Splitters, which is a little point that comes out on the lake. And on this side, it would be protected from the wind. So we had to paddle across that little sort of exposed section and then up Dora Creek to the river. And so we ended up by setting our plans. Here is a picture of us on the day. We had the newspapers there ready to photograph us doing our epic voyage, not so epic voyage. There's me in the front looking like the Russian Teletubby, and my brother in the back there. And so we had the boat in the water ready to go. And this is us on the leeward side, so the non-windy side. And then we started to paddle out into the elements to head across to Dora Creek. And here we are paddling, and look in the background. You see those white sections on the water? That are the white caps. It was just horrendously windy. That's us paddling. That's us paddling some more, and that's us paddling some more. And if you look really closely, you can actually see that we are further backwards from where we started. So it soon became apparent that it was not possible to actually paddle into the wind for that short section. So we turned around and we came back all the way to the shore, and we put the boat on the shore, and we realized that we were going to have to cut this journey back just a little bit more. We're going to have to take that section off there where we couldn't paddle across Lake Macquarie. So we're going to start Indora Creek. Not quite as impressive as going from Lake's Entrance, my friends, but nonetheless, we were completing the journey. And so we drove around to here. And then when we got to the entrance of Dora Creek, there's a little boat ramp there. Can I remind you that the wind direction was this here, which is almost exactly the direction of the channel facing. It was like, sorry, just to go back one, it was like a wind turbine. And we realized that we weren't even going to be able to paddle up Dora Creek. So in the end, someone had a power boat. They got their power boat. They put it in the water. We tied our rowboat to the power boat. And then they dragged us all the way up Dora Creek. And then we got to about here, which was a couple of 100 meters from Avondale College. The wind died off. It was a bit more protected. And we were able to finish the journey. Aren't you proud? I mean, if that doesn't, deserve a round of applause, nothing does. Thank you, Denise. Thank you, team. Why would I tell a humiliating story like that? Well, here's the answer. I think that often we showcase the great victories, the great wins. We hear stories of people doing remarkable things. And what we don't hear enough, I don't believe, are the attempts. We need to start applauding the attempt. A little while ago, I decided, because I like to challenge myself with new things, that I was going to learn how to do this thing called dock starting with a foil. So here's someone who's very proficient at it. And what you do, you can see underneath that surfboard, there's a thing that looks like an aeroplane wing. And you sort of stand on the edge of a dock, and then you push it, and then you jump on it. And if you get your timing right, you can actually make that thing propel along the water. And it's thoroughly impressive. You just Google it, look up dock starting. And I looked at this and I said, I need to be able to do that. And the internet is full of these, young men who are just super skilled, and they jump on and make it look so easy. And what I soon discovered, it's not easy at all. In fact, it's ridiculously hard. And here was the video that attracted me the most. It was this guy here that wasn't posting this great, how he could just step off and without even thinking, pump around and go on the water. It was this gentleman who published his first 200 attempts of dock starting. And this video you see him go splat, 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 200 plus times. And then after a while, you see him just get a little bit of it. And then he just gets going, and then it's a bit more and a bit more. But even at the end of this video, he's still not doing it properly. And, when I looked at this, I thought, do I respect this person any less for the fact that he's shown that he's a loser? Well, he's not a loser at all. What he's showing here is that he has determination and grit and the gumption to give it a go. You know what? I applaud that attempt. I applaud that attempt. I look to that. And so here's a quick little video of me, and I've done the sums. I think I'm up to about 500 attempts now. Okay, so just under a year ago, I decided I was going to try and learn how to dock start foiling, and this has been hundreds and hundreds of attempts. Here we go. Pretty shaky, eh? Look at that, getting the motion going. Do what's hard. And so, you know what? It's been a real journey for me. And so here's the point. This is the message today. I think that often, we feel like there might be something that we, a contribution we could make, something, meaningful difference we could make in the world, or something, whatever it might be. But often we're held back because we're worried about the fact that we might fail. But failure isn't failure if you lean forward into it and learn from it. And often I think one of the reasons that we're afraid to fail is because how we might look. Well, I've just shared a story, a complete dismal failure on my behalf. But you know what? I think that there's real value even from a wellbeing perspective in learning to applaud the attempt. And I love this quote by Theodore Roosevelt. He says, it's not the critic that counts. If those naysayers are out there pointing the finger at how you didn't succeed in a particular thing, It's not the critic that counts. It's not the one who points out how the strong man stumbles or how the doer of deeds could have done them better. I love this. It says the credit belongs to the person who's actually in the arena, who's making the attempt. And I won't read the whole thing, but I love how it finishes by saying, so that their place will never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat. My friends, we need to learn to applaud the attempt, right, in our own life and in the lives of other people. And it's really interesting, just to finish off, in studies of older people, more mature people, and they look at when they look back on their lives, what do they see, and what are their reflections? There's often regrets. But what's interesting is that the respondents often feel more regret about the things that they didn't do as compared to the things that they did do. It's regret due to things that they didn't try, that thing that they felt like they were impressed to have a crack at, to use Aussie language, but never were quite courageous enough to do it. And what's really interesting is the experience of regret is very strongly linked to poor health outcome and life satisfaction. And so my challenge for you is this, what would it look like for you to attempt? Is there something that you have that you feel like you've always thought, oh, maybe I'd try that, but then there's been something holding you back? You know what? Maybe it's time. And so here are reflection questions that we can spend a bit of time chatting with. The first one: do you find yourself holding back from trying things for fear of what others might actually think? Certainly when I look at that, I watch people now who would try and try and try again, and I'm more impressed by them than those people who can even do it first instance and have instant success. But do you draw inspiration from that quote by Theodore Roosevelt? Second question: do you agree that our biggest regrets relate to the things we didn't do and the opportunities we didn't take? That'd be an interesting point of reflection. And then the last thing is, what would it look like this month to applaud the attempt, in your own life, or maybe applaud someone else who's having a really good go at it as well? So that's my reflection, well-being insight for the month, and I'll hand it back to Mandy.